Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 202, Reviving Marital Sex. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me today, where we are going to talk about this topic of marital sex from both perspectives of the husband and the wife. Now, this is a topic that is often difficult to talk about for a lot of couples, but one that comes up a lot, especially when it comes to frequency, right? This is something that the husbands are usually like, hey, we are very much lacking in frequency. And then the wife will be like, yeah, I really could care less how often we are intimate. And so we have very different approaches to sex and intimacy, very different thoughts and very different feelings about it. And you know what is interesting? They're both valid. Right? It doesn't have to be that one person is right and the other person is wrong. One person is better, the other spouse is worse. It doesn't have to be any of that. What we need is a better understanding. So much information out there is incorrect. There is so much information out in the world that is missing. And part of my job with this podcast is to be able to bring the correct information to the forefront and really challenge each spouse to tap into the higher part of their brain and their thinking skills and start to think about intimacy differently and to really challenge old negative thoughts that maybe you have grown up with and are still hanging on to and say, yes, but how do those negative and sometimes deep-rooted thoughts affect my marriage today, affect our sex life today? Sometimes old thoughts that just keep coming to our minds need to be challenged. And this is the beauty of life coaching, right? It's not like the effort that is needed to think a new thought or to challenge an old thought is the same type of effort or energy that is needed to pull all the weeds out from our backyard. So it really, really can make a huge difference when we just use our efforts in the right way, mentally first. It can have such an awesome, awesome effect. And of course, this is why I just love life coaching. Now, it's interesting that when men are like, hey, intimacy is really, really lacking, and the effects on my life as a man are big. It's interesting that often their wife can dismiss that and just say, you know what? That's not real. You're making too big of a deal about it. And they will maybe say it's not valid. But I want to really point out for both spouses that may be listening to this podcast, everyone's feelings are valid, right? Humans get to feel feelings. And so let's say the frequency of sex is low. It is okay that the husband has some negative thoughts and feelings about that. That is valid. Husbands, we hear you. And at the same time, if let's say the sex frequency is once a week and a wife is like, man, that's too much for me. It feels like that's high. It feels like that's all we do. Those thoughts and feelings are also valid. It's okay to feel like, man, it seems like that's all my husband's interested in is sex. That's also valid. It's also valid to feel that that might be something negative. Here's the thing. We don't have to keep thinking negative thoughts, and we don't have to keep thinking, or excuse me, we don't have to keep feeling so crappy about the situation, right? Because now we can say, you know what? We're probably just lacking maybe a skill or two here and there that could really make a huge difference. I'm guessing that maybe a lot of us know about the 80-20 or 20-80 principle, right? That with 20% of effective skills and efforts can create 80% of our results. What if we applied this to intimacy? What if we applied this to our relationship, right? We don't need to change 100%. We don't need our spouse to change who they are for us to have amazing results. What if each spouse contributed 10% of improving things and the other spouse contributed 10% dedication to improve things? Now we've created this 20%, and that's all that's needed to give us an 80% better improvement, to revive things, to improve things. Man, that seems totally doable. That can give us so much hope for what the future holds for us. So let's not continue to downplay or invalidate what our spouse thinks and feels, because there's so much yet to be gained. Let's not define our sex life, our relationship. Let's not define who our spouse is on what we have not even been able to accomplish yet, because we were lacking one or two skills. It will be so much better if we don't do that. Okay, so let's talk for just a second about what it means to revive something. It means to give new strength or energy to something. It means to return to consciousness, which means that there is something that is happening in our brain. It means to renew in the mind or the memory. And it means to restore from a depressed, inactive, or unused state. So this is a great foundation for us to really consider when we want to revive the intimacy in our relationship. And of course, that is going to have a positive effect on our sex life, right? So we need to make sure that we are actually involving our mind, our brain, our thinking skills. And it's not enough to just think, right? All humans are thinking. The problem we fall into, the biggest trap, is that we end up thinking thoughts that don't help us get the results that we want. And often we end up thinking the same negative thoughts over and over again. And I'm not saying like, oh, we always have to be positive. That's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is we end up thinking a thought that doesn't help us. It keeps us stuck. So we're going to talk about this from both perspectives. Now, before we jump into that, right now, the reality, and according to statistics and some of the most recent polls, is that the average married couple is having sex about 56 times a year. So that's a little bit more than once a week. Now, unfortunately, that includes like married couples who are having a lot of sex, but it also includes couples on the opposite end who are hardly having any sex. So we have to really consider that and what that looks like. But that is what they're saying the average is. Now, what I usually find is that most couples are having less sex than that. And especially the ones I'm working with, they have sex far less than that. And so this is leading to all kinds of frustrations. It's leading to a lot of resentment and anger for both spouses, but for very different reasons. Now, it's really interesting to acknowledge in our mind, right? Because we're going to use our brain, our thinking, to really acknowledge that intimacy and the sexual relationship that we share with our spouse, it is part of the marriage. It's not the only thing. It's not the most important thing, but it is important to say it is part of the relationship, and it deserves our conscious attention. It deserves our higher thinking. It deserves our higher brain power. Not low level, not low level. We don't want to be using the same thinking skills when it comes to sex and intimacy that we used in first grade when we were learning our ABCs. Okay, we need to use higher thinking skills and really use the skill of thinking about our thinking about our thoughts, especially the ones that cause us the most pain, emotional pain. Those are the thoughts we want to pay attention to and actually challenge and say, why do I keep thinking this thought? Why do husbands keep thinking that their wife is a cold-hearted witch who's never interested in sex, right? That's just a thought. You don't have to keep thinking that thought. And for the women, why do we really get fixated on, gosh, my husband only seems to care about sex. It's the only thing he seems to be interested in. Nobody forces us to think that thought. And yet we keep thinking it a lot. So when each spouse continues to think a thought that does not serve them, here is that invitation to really challenge that thought. It's important to recognize that if we neglect using our higher thinking skills when it comes to sex and intimacy, things will continue to suck. Things won't improve. Just thinking about things more is not going to help, right? Because what if we're thinking all these horrible, negative, damaging thoughts? We have to do something different. We have to do something better. We have to think better in order to feel better. Now, when we neglect addressing sex, several things happen, right? Oftentimes we don't have as much of it, or we stop facing the reality of how to actually address sex in the relationship. So the frustration goes up, a lack of feeling understood and accepted by our spouse goes up. And we may feel a certain type of loss on a personal level, not just because of the lack of the frequency, but because what we make it mean about ourselves on a very deep and personal level. And so we really need to use our brain to start to address those things and say, hey, it's time to take a look at this. If you're married and you're struggling with sex, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. But we often think that once you're married, sex is going to be easy. No, marriage is the exact arena where we are supposed to start learning more about sex, discovering more about it, going through the ups and the downs about that side of ourselves and that type of sexual relationship. Yes, we are meant to experience these hardships in marriage. So don't think something has gone wrong. That's part of marriage. Now, I would love to really address the tendency of humans to make assumptions, right? So the women often assume that for their husbands, all they care about is sex. It's all about sex, and it's only about sex. But what if we were able to think about things differently and say sex is a part of the marriage. It is an important part. And what if we were to accept that sex is actually way more about other things than just sex? It's not only about sex, it's about way more than just sex. Sex is a vehicle for connection, for feeling loved, for feeling close to their spouse. So it's not just about sex. When we diminish the value of intimacy, we are also diminishing a very natural, normal human part of our spouse and saying, hey, don't do that. Don't make it all about sex. And if I think it's all about sex for my husband, we are really undermining their experience and what is actually true, because it's not just about the sex. It's not just about the orgasm and the pleasure. It's not. But when we continue to think it is, we are horribilizing our husband and thinking, man, they're just this animal. And all they care about is the pleasure. We don't have to do that. And it's not beneficial to do that. So we can choose to think, we can choose to challenge those types of negative thoughts and think on a much higher level. So here is something from the man's mindset when intimacy and the frequency is low, right? There are two kinds of things that will happen for a man. The first thing is they will think something is wrong with them, right? As a man, something's wrong with me. My wife doesn't want to be intimate with me. I'm not a good lover. I'm not attractive to her. I used to be attractive. She used to love making out with me, and now she hardly wants anything to do with me. Something is wrong with me. That's not a fun place to be. They take that very personal, outside of pleasure, right? They think something is wrong with them. The other way they might go is they might think something is wrong with her. What is happening? Why is she so cold-hearted? Why did she trick me into getting married if she was never really going to want to have sex with me? She knew this all along, and she just tricked me. She just wants me for what I can provide, right? My resources, my income to provide the sperm for the babies. Now, neither of these mindsets are helpful, and it could easily lead husbands to justifying their use of pornography or even an affair. But what's actually happening is that they are having these negative thoughts. They're taking them personally. They're making it mean something personal about themselves or their wife. And this is creating distance, emotional distance. Now, when it comes to intimacy, one of the definitions is to make things known, to make more of ourselves known to another person, right? The one we are committed to. And that's no easy feat. But when we start to think these negative thoughts and we continue thinking them, we have more distance. And so that's the opposite of saying, hey, let's actually get to the heart of things. Let's actually have more discussions. Let's make more things about ourselves known to our spouse so that we can become closer. That would be an amazing thing to experience. So men don't view sex as just a pleasurable thing. It is an emotional thing for them. And as a woman, as a wife, if we can really say, oh my gosh, I need to start thinking about this different. I've had it all wrong. That can be a game changer. Men often view sex as a way to express the emotion of love. Us women could really benefit from starting to think about this differently, right? To really think, hey, my husband wants to have sex with me a lot. He must really love me. He loves me, loves me. It's not just about the pleasure. He loves me. That's amazing. It's amazing. Now, what about the women's mindset, right? If she's not very interested in sex, it's not always because of something related to the husband, right? Her mindset is like, hey, there's a million things on my plate. My stress level is high. I'm exhausted, like literally. And I am not super excited about the way my body looks because I've had 6 babies. I don't feel super hot. I don't feel super attractive. And, I'm going through different hormones from day to day. And yeah, sometimes I get a little bit bugged when I see you on the phone and not helping with the kids, right? Women have a mindset of other things. We need other things to take place before our desire for sex goes up. And so if husbands don't know what those things are, this is a great conversation to have, right? Like get interested, become curious. What things do you want to feel secure about before you have sex, right? Sometimes they're just minor things. Sometimes they're things that may need a, a 5-minute discussion before sex. But man, is that hard to do? Not always. Sometimes that's very easy to do, right? Sometimes we can make it seem like, oh, if my wife needs something before she feels ready to have sex, oh, that's just going to be too hard. It's going to be too big of a thing. What if it's not? What if it's a small, easy thing? Husbands, I'm going to give you a golden tip here. Ask your wife, hey, what's one thing I could take off your plate right now? That often does the trick. Is that hard to do? No, because sometimes the answer is something very simple. Our brain likes to make sex and intimacy a huge, insurmountable task. What if we thought about that different? Like, what if it's actually easy? What if it's not this big thing? Now, obviously, life coaching is brilliant for these challenges because it challenges us to think about things outside of the box. Now, what are some practical things we can do to help improve and revitalize our sex life, our intimacy? Here are 5 easy things, and they don't need a lot of explanation. 1, start having more conversations about it, right? And I'm talking about not first grade level. Step up, use I statements. I am thinking like this, and I can see maybe it's not so helpful. I've been feeling like this, and I would love to talk about that, right? Using I statements to really express yourself and to be heard in a way that doesn't cause your spouse to be defensive. Fabulous communication. Number 2, work on creating better connections outside of the bedroom so that it's easier to connect inside the bedroom on a sexual level. If we are rarely connecting on some of the practical things of life, of running a household, with kids, if we're rarely connecting on that, it is going to be more challenging to connect in the bedroom. So why not? Why not improve? Let's do something. Let's coordinate a little bit better outside so we can coordinate a little better inside the bedroom. Share some activities together. This is number 3. Either activities you already know you love together, but also something new. And I really want to plug this one, right? Doing something new together. And don't say, oh, I don't think I would like to do something like that. What if that's not even the point? Is to only do a new activity that you think you will like. What if you just said, hey, let's do a new activity to expand our experience as a human being? And I want to do that with you, with my spouse. What if you picked an activity that you both are a little hesitant on and say, well, let's just try it because we're doing it together. That's the part that counts, is that you're doing something new together. You're in it together. That's awesome. Maybe you'll find a new activity that you guys both like and can do more of. Or maybe you're just going to be like, well, we did that together and we didn't like it that much, but we did it. And now we know. Now we're going to go try something new. Gosh, what a fun thing to be involved in. Trying new things together, no matter if you liked it or not, right? You'll be able to always talk about that and say, look at all the new things we tried together. What if you tried 200 new things together and all of them sucked? You still have an awesome track record of doing 200 new things together. Yeah, that newness can be very exciting for intimacy, right? It can create a lot of natural desire to be intimate. So I highly recommend that. Number 4, reduce stress. I've talked about this a lot in my podcast. When women feel high stress, it blocks their desire to be intimate. This is important knowledge for both the wife to know about herself, but also for the husband to know about his wife. This is not something that can be dismissed. This is chemical, biological, right? If stress is high, she cannot access her desire, her libido. So it's important to look at stress, right? Let's lower some. Let's take a warm bubble bath. Let's light the candles. Let's put on some calm, relaxing music. Let's unwind. Yes, that can revive our sex life. And number 5, of course, let's get some help. Let's talk to a coach. Let's take a course. Let's join a membership, right? Let's address this now in the marriage, which is the perfect arena to address these things. It's the perfect time to do it. And let's do it with somebody who has skills, who can see some of the things that you can't see, and who can give you some of the knowledge that might be lacking. So with that in mind, do not forget that I offer a free discovery session, 1 hour with me to discuss any challenges that you may be facing and how coaching can help. And it's easy to get on my website at shelly.andersoncoaching.com, and you'll see on the homepage, sign up for a free discovery session. So let's see if this week you can do one of those 5 things that we just talked about so that you can revive your sex life and revive your intimate connection with your spouse. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you can restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.